Okay.
I do hear the vacuuming. Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, now there shouldn't be any more vacuuming, but there are birds. Okay. Oh, you're listening to the recording. So now we are live, and we had to restart. We thought we were live, and now we're not anymore. I mean, now we truly are. So let me get back to my correct screen. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live episode, live debrief, rather, of Not Quite Magic. Today, Laura Holcomb and I are debriefing the wonderful episode with the wonderful Katharine Allen. And thank you for being patient. We started a few minutes late. We thought we were live and we weren't. And I gave such a good introduction. So I just want to give Laura an opportunity to say hello to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited about this, and we'll just put right up at the top that I am not an impartial commenter on this episode because Katharine Allen is a small hero of mine in many ways, but we'll get there.
Yeah, this interview, and as I was saying in my previous introduction, these debriefs that we do are really a way to just look back at the interview, see what might have been missing, see what I might have gotten wrong, and to check in, with anything that might have changed, and to see what thoughts Laura or Liz or anyone else joining us on these live debriefs might have, and then to answer questions. That's why we do them live. We want you all to join us and ask questions, and participate in that. This this episode in particular is really special. It was recorded with Katharine Allen, who's a wonderful colleague that we have in interpreting. She was co-president of Interpret America. She's a trainer, community interpreter trainer, a conference interpreter, a community interpreter, curriculum designer. She wears many hats, and she does them also well. And this interview was also recorded quite a while ago. It was recorded in the beginning of the pandemic. So even though I launched it in December, episode 5, I recorded it with her in April, right? So in April, everything was new with the pandemic. We really didn't know how things were gonna go at all. And so it's a pretty special interview, and I think it's a really good one to kind of debrief. And I did check in with Katharine to see what she wanted to update. So I'll talk about that as we go through today. And I think because it was one of the first interviews that I did for the podcast, and because Katharine's such a good friend, I there were some things that we kind of had a very informal conversation and ended up not, we could have addressed more things. So I look forward to seeing what you, our viewers, and what Laura have to say about some things that might have gone, less, we could have said better, or I could have followed up with more questions. So how do we want to start this off? Do we have anyone viewing us? Do we have any questions already? We usually don't get a lot of questions, which is okay. So you'll keep me posted, Laura, if
I
we get
will.
anything.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I guess what were your impressions, Laura, of this interview? Just to start us off, how did you see it?
I think one of the things I just most appreciate every time I work and talk with Katharine Allen is the way she brings us back to a more expansive view of our field. Let me turn that off. And once again, she did that. The other thing that I loved was how while it's simultaneously she's drawing us outwards towards a bigger view of the field, but at the same time, it was one of the first times I really heard her even start to go into the micro world that she lives in. So her providing services in a rural area at the community level was something I don't get to hear a lot from Katharine about, but certainly, as she pointed out, informs the broader work that she does. And then finally, as a person like you, Elena, who wears many hats myself, it's always just a continuous um, comfort to listen to Katharine um, and realize that can be done successfully, because sometimes those of us who do wear many hats, you suffer from a bit of this what is it, jack of all trades, master of none syndrome. And and what it reminds me of is just when I listen to her and I think about my relationship to her and the work that she does, it reminds me that how important it is that someone is out there doing that work, and still how much of it there is left to be done.
Yeah, I agree. She really does so much good, and she's been more involved with educational interpreting, which she and I didn't talk too much about in the interview. And I definitely want to talk about that a little bit down the road. I think the first thing that we have to talk about, which is, it's not even the elephant in the room, it's the tears in the room, which is the end of Interpret America. So Interpret America, for those of you who don't know, is a wonderful organization that Katharine Allen and Barry Slaughter Olson founded 10 years ago to bring together the interpreting profession and to really elevate the visibility of interpreters, to unite us. There were no, they were really trying to eradicate the silos, trying to, not have us be divided in as court interpreters and medical interpreters or healthcare interpreters and conference interpreters, military interpreters, educational interpreters, because that's something that we often tend to do, and a lot of the associations tend to be fragmented that way. And so Interpret America was really about bringing all of the interpreters together, and they hosted wonderful summits that started out being annual and at some point went to being every 2 years, and really elevating, like they said, the voice of interpreters and making sure that interpreters were heard, that interpreters were seen, and that interpreters could have a place to gather and further the profession. And last year, Barry Olson, who's such a capable interpreter, such a wonderful trainer and wonderful person, got hired by one of the big RSI platforms, and he had to leave Interpret America, and so that was a huge loss. And then they decided to end Interpret America. And I asked Katharine what was the biggest thing that she was going to miss about Interpret America. And that's one thing I would say, Laura, for you to think about too. And if anyone is listening, if you want to send us your thoughts, like, what is the biggest thing you'll miss about Interpret America? And she said it's primarily working with Barry. They had a really good working relationship where they were able to dream up, as she said, these big ideas and get them going and move them forward. And she said they were really just capable of coming together, which just doesn't happen very often, coming together as business partners and, yeah, being free to kind of put out whatever big dream they had and then making it happen. And I think we saw the results. We got the benefits of that wonderful partnership, and that's what she said she's going to miss the most is being able to work with him. As of course, as happy as she is for him, this was a very big step in his career, and it's a great opportunity. He joined Kudo, which is one of the fastest growing RSI platforms, run by some great people, and it was a very good opportunity for him. What do you What do you think? What do you think you're going to miss about Interpret America, Laura?
There's a couple of things to draw out there. In Catherine's response, it just reminds me of how special it is to find uh, a professional partner and friend in our industry, and that resonates a lot with the partnership that you and Liz and I struck up however long ago. That it's been a big, big gift. And as Barry is moving on, we're going to have Liz more involved in other projects, and so she won't be. So I'm grieving that loss that Catherine is referencing. Just definitely brings up that sort of bittersweet, because you're happy for the other person that they're being able to grow in ways that are of interest to them. Um, so yes, that is so special to have trusted colleagues and partners in this field who can bring out, can push us, expand us, and bring out the best in us. And it also got me thinking, this is a major side note, but worth saying, when I lived in Brazil, I think one of my big sadnesses was that I felt like while I had many friends in the conference interpreting industry in Brazil, that I was never called upon by any of them, or maybe on very rare occasions, to share the booth with them. And that was sad for me. And I think it's that hearing Catherine express that is somewhat healing, because it helped me realize, and especially in my experiences with working in the booth with you, Elena, and with Liz, it helped me realize how special and how important that trust is between, whether you're working at a field-wide level like Catherine was with Barry, or whether at a micro level in the booth with someone, or collaborating on an interpreting job with someone. There's not a lot of incentive to try. Once you find that, there's not a lot of incentive to then go out there and give it a shot with someone new. That implies a whole lot of risk on that person's part. And then, as far as what I'm going to miss about Interpret America, it got me thinking, Elena. And of course, we weren't able to attend the goodbye party, which I heard was wonderful because we were training that very day. But I think Interpret America was the first interpreting event, one of their conferences that I went to. And now that I think of it, we were asked in our last training course, Elena, how you and I met, and it was really at an IMIA conference, right? You were presenting. I saw your presentation. We talked later in the hall, if I'm remembering correctly. But I saw you from across the room at one of Interpret America's first summits, and you were burned and emblazoned into my mind because you were the lady who had brought the baby.
Yes. Oh,
I thought
yes.
that is cool. I mean, I was like, way to go, gal. And of course, and I didn't know anything about kids at that point. I didn't have any of my own nor experience with kids to know, like, kind of all the intricacies behind that move. Um, but yeah, it was very special because it was the first time, it's what I'm sure Catherine and Barry were laboring for. I am the quintessential audience member, an example of that I came to this conference and the whole world opened up before me, because I was a practicing medical interpreter who was about to embark on trying to expand my skill set into other settings and realms. And I was the person who, there were booths in the back of the room, and I was like, what are those? Like, I know what those are, but I would feel very uncomfortable to be in one, and all the rest of it. And so, big debt of gratitude to those efforts.
Yeah, those summits were amazing. They were so good. And I mean, that one in particular I remember because of the baby, and everyone everyone refers to me. Um it was it I don't even think it was Felix. I think it was Frida. I have 3 children, and I I often can remember by, yeah, what year it was by what baby, but yeah, I don't think it was Felix because that would only have been 8 years ago, and I think it was the first one actually. I
Man,
think it
how
was
it
the first one.
blurs, doesn't it? It all blurs
Yeah,
together.
it's like, but I have this. I wish I could cue the photo, but I can't. Somebody took a great photo of me with him on the sling, and I'm holding a glass of wine. It's like, yeah, I'm doing and talking to somebody at the conference. There were a few people that were not happy with the presence of the baby, but most people really liked it. And another great memory is Frake Langhoff, who owned was it Intrans bookstore? I forget the name of his business. Out
Yeah, who would bring
right.
all the interpreting books? Yeah.
Who also we also lost recently in our profession. He's alive and well, as
Oh,
far as I know, but
okay.
he's not. He doesn't come to
Right.
he doesn't run the bookstore closed before the pandemic. But he held the baby for quite some time so that I could go and attend, and it was quite nice. And I think it goes into what you're saying with trust, that we're lucky to be among people that we can trust. Even that I can trust
We
my
can hand our babies
my
to.
new baby.
That's yeah.
Oh yeah, it was that was quite good. And I remember the speaking of RSI, the company, remember this? It was at that summit. There was a company that was going to, the interpreter is going to be rated because RSI was already there. It was already happening. And I don't remember the name of that company, but they were going to rate you and you were going to have ninja labels. You're going to be a black belt, a blue belt. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, it had the Shell logo. It was one of the first, and there, yeah, a big uproar in the industry about it. Rightfully so, right? Um, Rightfully so in many ways, but also just um, a logical reaction to what seems like huge sweeping change. And it was the bellwether of huge sweeping change to
Yeah.
come. Um, there's an expression in Portuguese that he who arrives first drinks clean water, right? Um,
I don't
oh,
know if we have, I don't know if we talk about
that
that here
must
in the South.
that
Ele
must be a very
Quem
country
chega primeiro bebe
Mineiro.
água,
Yeah, bebe agua limpa.
água limpa.
Byron, it was one of Byron's favorites that he took hold of. But there's also contrasting expressions that actually have quite the opposite meaning, that it's basically the first people who get there, they're the one who get all the diseases and they do all the exploring and they die, right, for the others to then be able to come in. They forge the way, um, and kind of sacrifice themselves in the process because they're the first ones and they're not going to get it right. I mean, they're necessarily not going to get it right.
Yep.
And that's kind of what happened in this situation. But I love that you brought that up because that brings me back to Barry. I didn't know Barry personally, but I loved the way he used the hard-earned respect that he had in the field to take, you know, a, a quite an always very measured and reasoned stance, but a quite different one than the loudest voices out there. And it was really, shout out to Barry, you need to know this. It was really hearing someone at that level, and I wasn't really a part of the conference industry at that time, um, that emboldened me to be able to say, like, maybe it's okay to keep an open heart and mind towards this technology, um, and not just go with the quite reasonable but reactionary voices, that were so loud at the time. So I I commend and I am grateful to Barry for that.
Yeah, he was, and she talks about him as a pioneer, and he really was a pioneer in the field and such an expert for any kind of interpreting technology. I mean, he had the blog, he had the videos where he was kind of demoing or showing you how to work with different platforms, different technology. And really, I remember, multiple presentations. We had him at the New England Translators Association conference one of the years that I organized that. I brought him as our keynote, and he gave a great presentation. And the slide would be totally different today, even though that was only 3 or 4 years ago, where he had the names of all the different players. And yeah, so it's great to see him now taking on this new role, and I think he's going to continue to do good, and I trust that he's in a good place, and there'll be a better place because of him.
And I'll jump in and I'm going to take it in a new direction. So just rein me in,
Go for it.
if needed. Uh, but you had mentioned in your intro to this episode that it was from a while ago, but I hadn't heard the interview when it was kind of first done, right? So I'm hearing it more recently, and to me, it didn't seem outdated at all. And that just goes to show exactly what Katharine was pointing to in the episode, that everyone has been scrambling and that we still don't quite have our feet under us. However many months into this pandemic, and I think at one point she was probably about to, she was like, I don't even know the term to call this, but I think she was saying, excuse my language, but she was I think her mind wanted to say, this has been a real shit show for everyone involved, just in that it's so much, there's so much adapting that has been done. But in that, I loved listening to the episode and feeling like, we who are working, not only on the client side but also with ourselves, like learning ourselves, and with other interpreters. I liked feeling like, because I esteem Katharine so much, it feels like, you know, when she comes out and expresses kind of her perspective on things, and when I feel like I've naturally intuited, or we've fallen into line with that, it feels like a nice completion. Specifically, let me get to what I'm saying. In the fact that she really pointed to, clearly, without ambivalence, the fact that court interpreters, healthcare interpreters, community interpreters, educational interpreters are going to need increasing access to, and she phrased it like this, which I never had, conference interpreting skill sets. Right? And that's what we've been busy, kind of discussing internally at Seven Sisters, about what that transfer of skills looks like, how it needs to be adapted. And I also really, what resonates with what Katharine said, yeah, I don't have the profile of an immigrant either. And I hadn't put it like this, but Katharine was able to get a master's degree, and then she really felt it was her calling, and this is the path we are headed down as well, to figure out how to chunk what she learned through that experience and then dish it back out the best way possible. And that is something I'm and I think you are, as well, from the experiences that you've been able to have. We're both interested in figuring out how to pass that along.
Yeah, and I might even have to step out and grab those great notes that I took while I was on the beach this morning. So for those of you who know me well, I usually am not in summer clothing in the winter months in United States of America, but I'm currently in Brazil, and I'm going to be here for a couple more months. And it's been raining for 2 weeks. And today was the first day where we had sun. It wasn't even full sun, but it didn't matter.
I'm so happy for
And
you.
yeah, and I got up and I said, kids, we got to hit the beach. I have to be back home pretty early. I have a meeting, and then I have this live debrief, but we've got to take advantage of it. So I was actually listening to the episode and taking notes on the beach, and I took some great notes, and that I might have to go check because they're not quite in my mind. But it was similar to what you were saying. I remember that extent of it was that her her focus on taking this pursuing advanced knowledge through an advanced degree, and then sharing it, giving, and building up the community. She, most of her teaching, the curriculum, and I would say, even I think even most of her work is more in the community setting and more dialogue interpreting. She runs a program, and I think she did a training about Indigenous interpreting went down to Mexico and interpreted there with some, trained Indigenous people. And it's, it's that kind of work that really is really needed. It's kind of taking somebody who has that kind of insight and training and then sharing it with the interpreters that make such a difference to people that need it so much. Yes, people that attend a conference need a really good interpreter as well, and a well-trained interpreter, but they usually don't. There's no, is it dearth that means poverty? Anyway, there's no lack of good interpreters in the conference level. Mm-hmm. And you can't even really get there if you don't know what you're doing. And people attending a conference are going to be fine, with their language, their amount of language access. But people in the community, that's not the case at all. And
yeah,
so
that's
Katharine,
what she brought up. Yeah, that even now,
I mean, it's really, and so she's out there doing that, which is, yeah, I mean, we're trying to do that at Seven Sisters, wanting to train interpreters who are working with people in this country who are language marginalized, mm-hmm. to use that term instead of the limited English proficient, and to help them access services and have a fuller life, and have, sometimes just the bare minimum, and other times, more. I attended my daughter's PTO meeting last night via Zoom, and we live in a community that has a lot of Spanish speakers. I think the Hispanic population is higher than the English speaking population in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And so they said that they were going to have translation for the meeting. So I went half to give thanks to the teachers and the principal for all the good work that they're doing, teaching those kids online, and half, of course, with my interpreting hat to see what they were doing. And they were doing it in Zoom. And I think it was somebody who works at the school who was doing it consecutively in Zoom for the people at the meeting. And she did an amazing job. She was getting it through. And of course, the whole time I'm like, oh, I really want to offer them some training, just a few more tips and she could do even better. I could tell her about note taking, tell her about, I could tell them about Zoom simultaneous. It was really tempting, to kind of want to want to go in there, because those are the people on the ground that are doing this educational interpreting. And a lot of times it's without any
and doing
they're just doing it in a
amazing
vacuum.
work. Yeah. I mean, I won't mention any names, but just think about the group that we worked with just recently. I mean, these are amazingly talented interpreters, unless we sound like we're just patting ourselves and Katharine all on the back. I mean, thank goodness that some of what Katharine is doing and what we are doing is useful, because it's what, in my case, it's all I have to offer. I can't have, for example, I can't go back and rewrite my childhood or my early history to be, in my case, completely bicultural, right? So I can seek to learn and improve, but I can't, I can't have some of full-throatedly some of the skills that the interpreters that I work with actually bring to bear on their work. So thank goodness some of the things that I am somewhat good at can be useful to other people, hopefully.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, and I think there's just so much need for all of it. I mean, in the community setting, we need as many people to have knowledge of how to work it more efficiently, how to get that message across. And it would be, I think it's the little bit of penetration that there is in educational interpreting is happening because of people like Katharine Allen. She did give me an update about some of the educational entities that are out there for educational interpreting, but I'm going to take a pause and just go get my notes.
Go get your
Um,
notes. And before we get to educational interpreting, I'll talk through while you get your notes a little bit about her update on remote interpreting in general, because we were almost there. Um, so what Katharine brought up in kind of some update comments to the actual episode was the fact that if there were already barriers to language access services like interpreting before the pandemic, um, it's even more pronounced now. But and I think her hope, but certainly mine as I think about it, is that there are definitely people who, basically their rights are being infringed upon right now. So I don't want to make light of that at all. But I think the hope in the fact that there is a lack of, Elena, a lack of access at this very moment, a pronounced lack of access due to the conditions of the pandemic. I think the silver lining is that as everything gets dismantled and put back together, that on the other side of that, we're going to have tools to increase language access beyond what was happening pre-pandemic. So right now, like the availability of technology and remote services is actually leaving people out of the loop and behind. But I think once we figure out how to get it right, those same tools that were excluding people will become a force for inclusion.
yeah, I think so, and I think that, as even though the interview was in April, and I actually asked Katharine in the follow up, I was like, well, what do you think the pandemic, what has it taught you, or what have we learned as a profession? And she was like, this question makes me laugh because, we're still in the middle of it. What are you asking me to tell? What did we learn? But, you know, as Barry and Katharine and you and I and Liz had been working on it before as well, we had already been looking at remote interpreting along with many other people. Um, and then, as she said, it just kind of hit, and then suddenly everybody was like, oh, wait a minute, how do we do this? We need this. And there's still, I think it's still very much trying to figure out how to have it, and how do you provide better access. And it was really only the places that were proactive about it ahead of time. It was only they could be, they were proactive in that they were prepared. And so when the pandemic hit, as we heard from, Vanessa Costa, who has employee interpreters that were in a call center doing video and telephonic interpreting, and we're able to go home, and in 72 hours have it up again and serving 1,000 encounters a day. you know
And Katharine pointed out the really cool thing is that, and I've definitely seen this orientation from community interpreters, educational interpreters, healthcare interpreters, who very full-throatedly, the ones at least that I've been in contact with, instead of saying, no, we can't let this happen, because it's going to be problematic, and the transition to technology is problematic in many ways. Instead, there are people who even that self-aware to the T, knowing they are just not good with technology, and they grit their teeth, and they come to, they do things with me, or they go somewhere else to say, I'm going to learn how to use these tools that are not familiar to me. I am not a digital native. And to see, and I think that comes from the underlying access, access-hearted orientation of these settings, that just spur people to say, we got to get these people their services, even if even at my cost, right? Even if that falls on me to then go get additional training and deal with the headaches that come from these changes. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see. And on top of that, yeah, the world for the opportunity and need for, and this was what Katharine clearly states in her update, for community and educational and healthcare interpreters to have strong simultaneous skills is here and now. So that's really exciting. But what Katharine reminded me in her update is it's not just learning the hard skills of simultaneous, which many already actually have built, of their own accord skills and simultaneous. But what has to go with that is a lot of communication and confidence building around all of the things surrounding that, how to work in a team with an interpreter, how to talk about why that's necessary, how to, on steady ground, advocate for the use of microphones, knowing where the line is between me being able to do a good and accurate job and where, despite everyone's best efforts, the conditions that you're working in are just really not good enough to actually render good interpretation. And so that reminds me, as we think about putting together curriculums and stuff, that we need to really build in space for all of those tiny little tendons that go around the actual skill set of simultaneous interpreting that I've been, fortunate enough to have been privy to these conversations and to have had a space to work all of that out, that we need to build that into any sort of training that looks at simultaneous.
Yeah, there's so much there that I keep like, oh yes, I want to say that, I want to say that. There's so much truth to that. And I think, one thing that you said, from what Katharine mentioned in her update was this, like you said, the idea of getting out of your comfort zone, of being able to take that leap of faith. And, yeah, we're seeing it. I did a survey in June for the keynote that I gave for a local conference on healthcare interpreting, and it was over 270 respondents, if I'm not, if memory serves me well. And it was about the challenges and how has it been, what's the state of things for you as an interpreter. And it was really neat. And one of the things that I saw and that I was able to highlight was that, yes, it was a really difficult time. And I think it still is, that there was a lot of people without work, a lot of people afraid of losing their jobs, a lot of people with everyone was with less work. And yet almost everyone said that they got to learn something new, and they talked about the technology as being something that they were learning, and so that they were going beyond what they knew before, and now they're going, into something that they didn't want to do, didn't think they could do it, and they realized that they could. And I saw it. I taught a class this last semester in the fall, and I'm teaching it again in March through UMass Amherst. They have the online certificate in interpreting and translation, and I gave a 1-credit class in interpreting technology. And it was mostly students that I had taught before in that program, and some of them were the students who had most struggled with technology, and they took that class. I wouldn't have thought that those students would have done it, because they were people that in the beginning, the first class they took with me was, quite difficult for them to do much beyond kind of open a link. And they took that leap, and the results were the same. They loved it. They felt empowered. They felt like, it was worth doing this, even though I was afraid, which is, a big theme for me. I mean, I think it's so important that we do it. It's unfortunate that we were pushed into it. That's, I mean, I don't want to minimize that. Don't want to even come close to minimizing that. And I wish we didn't have to go through this, but that
we
is
might
the
as well
silver lining.
celebrate. Yeah, we might as well celebrate. I want to make sure before this ends that we talk about wages. Um, that's one of the aspects I really liked about this episode, that Katharine says, you know, people are laboring and they're not making the wages that they need to be making, and that she very honestly says, which people aren't ripe to talk about, like, I don't know that I had to be stipend to participate in this profession, by my partner, essentially. And, I was able to make a living while living in New York as a healthcare interpreter, but a full-time healthcare, I mean, it was 40 hours a week, full-time. My language combination was enough in demand to be able to even get the work I needed. Um, but in many ways, I had to be stipend by another earner as well to make it work in a place like New York. And so I think if anyone, at any point in time is watching this, what I want to say clearly is that, you know, as the need and the opportunity opens for the use of the simultaneous mode in healthcare and educational and community, as much as you can, stand firm on getting increased wages for that. That's an opportunity, and for working at a distance, and having gone out there and learned the technological skills to reduce the burden on others. Because sure, you can work at a distance on these platforms and not prepare yourself, right? But then all of that load that you didn't take on yourself goes on someone else. Either, wasted money for an event that didn't work out because of the interpreting, or on the tech, who then has to spend a lot of time troubleshooting with you as the interpreter when they could be focused on other people who need that attention. So, as we talk about how exciting it is, the opportunity to go out and learn new things and build our skill sets, take a moment to just stand centered. And I say this because sometimes it's hard for myself, but stand centered in the efforts that you're making, and we all should have been in those fields, been making more, right? And why aren't we making more? I mean, let's just, as there is a groundswell in the United States, particularly, for us to all stop and think about all kinds of systemic discrimination that's going on, that is happening in our field. Why aren't community interpreters making as much as they should be making to be able, to have a living wage for the skill set that they bring to the table? Because a lot of these interpreters, and Elena, rein me in if this sounds misspoken to you, or data doesn't support this, or what doesn't support this, but a lot of the people working in these fields are women and are immigrants. And so, and the people that we are supposedly serving, the conception out there is that we are working in a compliance mode on behalf of societally disfavored and disadvantaged people, right? On behalf of immigrants, usually, who do not have a lot of economic resources, maybe education, their access to education has been compromised along the way as well. And so that's the other reason that our wages are low, because the people that we are supposedly working for are not people in power in our society. And the truth is we don't work just for the patients. We work for the doctors and the nurses and the school administrators, and, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that we need to really work on changing the tone of. But I think it's a big opportunity for us all to come together, recognize the work that we do. And, I know the on the ground reality when you need to make money is we need to make money, but hopefully we at an individual level can do our best to at least understand even if we don't take action around it at the individual, work on understanding the value that we add, and make little steps towards our wages and our voice in our conditions matching a little bit of the value that we add, while at a bigger field level, people are out there advocating systemically to change things.
Yeah, I don't think that, I mean, there's nothing to rein you in. You're right on point about it. I think in addition to what you said, it's also remembering, and I've talked about this with a couple of colleagues who initially initially didn't see the need to charge more for remote, or we're charging significantly less because they were being offered that, um, and so much of it is a mindset where, I reminded them, it's like, the fact that you have a place to do this, the fact that you have Ethernet, strong internet and Ethernet cable, that you have a computer that can support this, that you have just the equipment alone, the monthly payments that you make for your equipment, the investment that you've made, then the investment in the time that a lot of us have to, because as you said, a lot of us are female, and a lot of us have families, uh, you know, that's time that you have to take out yourself to have that quiet place, to have a place not only that's quiet, but in many settings that's holds by the confidentiality norms, right? That's following HIPAA. And that you should be charging more for that. So I think when we think about, when you think about wages, it's there's all those complexities taking place, but like you said, Laura, really ground yourself and stay firm and know that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of us out there, and we can change it. If we hold firm and stay united, we can change that. It doesn't have to be the payers. There's some people who knowingly are paying too little, but the vast majority of them haven't thought about it, or they're not charging their clients enough, and their clients don't know any better and haven't really thought about the value of it, haven't seen the difference between an untrained and a trained interpreter. And so I think that, having that ability to really stand your ground and say, no, this is what I'm worth, this is what it needs to, I need to earn to make it worthwhile, is really important. I think I did mention that I wanted to talk a little bit more about educational interpreting, because we are getting to the end here, and that's something that Katharine has been really involved in lately. And I think it is kind of the new frontier. Healthcare interpreting in the United States, as many of you know, healthcare interpreting has been getting stronger for the last, I'd say 20 years now, 10, where we're already in 2029. So almost 12 years ago, we had the first certification for healthcare interpreters. And it was already, at that point, it was already developed enough to be able to do certification. We had standards of practice. And now we see educational interpreting, I think, is the next one that's coming up, for more professionalization, for some standards, for training programs being created. We're at the really exciting point where it's all new, and we can take advantage of all that we learned with healthcare interpreting and apply it to this really important field. So I wanted to mention the two organizations that Katharine talked about in her follow-up. She wanted to join us today, and I really wanted to have her on, but unfortunately, she has a standing meeting at this time, so there was no way for her to join us. But she talked about, for educational interpreting, that there's, where is it? Let me just find it here. There's the interpreting and translation and education work group. And so they're about to become a formal organization. And it's ITE. And so they're really going to look to try to build it up into an organization, and it'll look somewhat like the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare, which is such a valuable organization. Shout out to all the
Unbelievable. Yeah.
all the people there.
That's so exciting.
And
That I'm going to
yeah,
put it here in the chat. It's the
oh, that's yep,
itworkgroup.org.
ITE work group. Oh yes, thank you. iteworkgroup.org. Um, they're also trying to get a new division at the American Translators Association. So and having been on the board recently, I can talk a little bit about the internal works, the working of these divisions. And there's an educators division, and I know that when it was initially proposed, the educational division, or one of the reasons for it, and I think for which they will probably get that division to happen, is that when there's a conference, you usually submit proposals under a division. And so all the proposals that are for trainers and educators go to the educators division. And of course, all the ones about educational interpreting started to come in, and then there were so many of them, and you can only have so many presentations per division, per room, really, in a conference. And so I hope that effort works out. They usually need a number of signatures and a solid leadership team, and the board in general approves those. So I wish them luck with that. That'll be really interesting, and maybe even in the next conference, which is going to be hybrid, I think it's going to be in Minnesota and also online in October, the ATA conference. Maybe we'll have a division by then. And then the third one, which is a group that launched last year, that's focusing on looking at accreditation. So looking at certification, that's the NAETISL. And of course, there's the really good work that the Orange County Department of Education is doing, and they're going to have an annual conference in September. And I believe, well, yes, I think there's going to be some good talks there at that conference.
Yeah, I think there will. I've put
They
that
do really good work
in the chat as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was her follow-up in terms of educational interpreting. And I kind of, I had talked about my experience seeing it. I think in terms of wrapping this up, oh, I know what I wanted to talk about, because I mentioned this in the beginning. And this tied into one of the things that you were saying, Laura, is the new IEC US, what is it? The US IEC guidelines for RSI, which I looked at, and those just came out just a couple of days ago. And those are really interesting in how they look at how they're looking at some of the things that you mentioned. And I really like the fact that they divided it into guidelines for different people. So there's guidelines for organizers of meetings. This is actually in the opposite order.
And just to clarify, if I was trying to do a quick search. Was this IEC USA or
yes,
coming through IEC Global, but published by IEC USA? Because it's rare that individual chapters would create their own kind of association-wide.
Yeah, well, this was, I should say, I said guidelines. They're calling it tips.
Okay.
So
okay.
that's
Right.
probably
an important distinction when
that's an important distinction.
We're dealing with IEC.
Yes, with IEC. And so I'm sorry, because that was my bad.
And let's we're talking about the International Association of Conference Interpreters. Just not everyone is in that world.
Not everyone knows. Yes, yes. So we're now jumping into the world of conference interpreting, but I think it's really worthwhile talking about briefly, because so the USA office or division of the International Association for Conference Interpreters, which is it's AIIC from French, because it started in Europe. And they came up with these tips for the management of remote simultaneous interpretation for virtual conferences, which, and there's a lot that we can take from that, but and they divide it into four groups. So they look at, and they're calling these like kind of new and additional responsibilities and commitments on all these parties. So there's for the interpreters, and they're putting, for example, one of them is you will provide the interpreter will provide a quiet office as a workaround. You will provide a computer to replace the console. So they're really kind of going through, and I'm not going to read them all out, but they're going through all of these things to talk about, look at all these additional things that the interpreters
That's
are doing.
really useful framing. And I actually had in my notes, I'll be brief, but there was this big, as the transition to RSI happened in the conference field, one of the ways that conference interpreters, at first they were like, well, maybe we should charge less because, well, we don't have to travel and the rest. And really, I think everyone as a field came to understand actually this is more burden on us in many ways. And the organizers are now usually virtual as well. So they're saving all kinds of costs on, a brick and mortar establishment and on travel expenses, both for their delegates and the interpreters themselves. And I think the same thing, healthcare interpreters or educational interpreters, if you go out and invest in simultaneous skills and understanding how to adequately use technology, think of all of the money you are saving people in, that you are saving hospitals. Time is a big cost. And so when you learn those skills and can adequately deliver them, you cut, doctor appointment time
Mm-hmm.
nearly in half. you know so think about that as you build your pride in these budding skills, that there's no reason for you to accept less, because ultimately you are enabling further access at a lesser cost
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah, because it's much more efficient.
Mhm.
Yeah, so and since we're at the top of the hour, but I really liked it because it framed it for the interpreter responsibilities and commitments, and then the users, and it talks, of course, about a headset, separate microphone, turn off all your notifications, be in a quiet place, um, and then advice and guidance for technical support. So that's the third group. It talks about having techs and doing a test with the interpreters ahead of time. Woohoo! And then finally the meeting organizer. Um, and so this is a really interesting document. I think it's really really good to look at. We can put the link on this. If you don't have the live link, we can put it after in the comments because it's really good. They're good tips for anyone working virtually, and it's very easy to understand. It doesn't have any kind of complicated um, lingo.
Yeah, I was just trying to find it online. We'll post that in the chat on YouTube with another resource I'm thinking of as well. All
Yeah,
right.
and I think, and the last thing I was going to say, which is a really quick one, which when I started this season of the podcast, which was about remote interpreting, and I started asking everyone about like, what do you call it? And I think Katharine Allen's is the only one that I left that question in there. Almost everyone else I edited out because I realized like, yeah, there's so much more interesting things to talk about. And do we call it remote? Do we call it virtual? And then now, what is it? It's been not quite a year, and I think remote is the word. I don't see people calling it virtual interpreting, distance interpreting.
Well,
I
it's going
think
to be
remote.
like languages. It's going to be regional and needs to be regional, to respond to different contexts. And so I really think here in the Americas, remote interpreting still makes sense and is widely understood. And Elena, I know you've talked about, and the fields that we come from, we're trying to communicate at the end of the
Yeah.
day, and that's the stance you and I take. And we've talked about how Portuguese is very accepting of, very no need to like follow strict rules out of some notion of correctness, and that the idea in the end is that we transmit an idea, that when we say something it conjures up a certain idea in someone else's brain. And remote seems all right. I got to shut up because we got to end on time.
Right, and it will be an hour once we because we started a couple of minutes late. Well, thank you again, Laura. It's always wonderful to have someone here with me, and hopefully all of you watching live and watching after also get something about this. Let us know in your comments if there's someone that you want us to interview for the podcast. If you have any thoughts about what we talked about, any
Yeah. I want to hear people's
resources.
experiences around, we brought up lots of wages, technology, simultaneous skills. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, so we have our first oh, Jess was there were a couple of comments here that I didn't read, but yes, Alfonso saying the better pay for interpreters discussion will require a lot more time. Yes, it would. If you want us to do an episode all about that, and you have someone in mind, if you want to come and be interviewed, or if you have someone else that you would think be good, that might be a good one to have a group discussion about. We've had some of these live podcasts that are with groups of people. Um, Let us know. Definitely let us know. We're here. You know where to reach us. We're all over social media. Thank you for thank you for joining us today. And I'm the next episode is going to be with Naomi Bauman, and she is the CEO and president, if I'm not mistaken, of DSI Interpretation. And I'm editing that this week, so that will be launching next week as the first episode of 2021. So stay tuned for that interview. It's really good. We talked a lot about that from the perspective of somebody who owns quite a big company and had to pivot.
DS, right? I don't think there's an I. DS
Right.
interpretation? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's DS Inc. Yes. See you next time.